I think one of our major problems was coming up with a security system that would be acceptable to both parties and to convince them that we knew what we were talking about and we were addressing the issues that concerned them. On the other hand, not to come up with something that was so detailed that we would tie the hands of the administrator and the chief of police, who would eventually be put into the role of implementing it. And as Roy has said, we lean very heavily on the advisory teams on both sides. First of all, we walk the city with Nazmi and with Danny Seidelman, who know the city inside out, who know the history, the geography, the genealogy, the human side of factors. Then we walked it with the security teams from both sides. On the Israeli side, a team that represented Mossad, Shin Bet, the former chief of police of Jerusalem. On the Palestinian side, General Bakri and a lawyer, and got their perspectives on what they thought were the flashpoints and the issues that really needed to be addressed. And that was how we started our work. I would say that we got agreement from both sides on a lot of the issues. We got disagreement on a number of very important ones. For example, it was our contention that the Old City Police Service should include members of the Israeli nation and the Palestinian nation, that they should be brought in, not necessarily straight from their police services, but as recruits and trained to give them a feel for involvement. This was absolutely and squarely countered by both sides, who said we must have a police service that is international. They accepted the fact that it would be helpful to have what we ended up calling community liaison officers from both sides who could travel and move with the international police service to deal with issues that were common to either of the two communities. As Art mentioned earlier, both sides agreed that there should be a weapons-free zone except for members of the police service. We had to deal with the very unusual set of circumstances for a police service that not only did community policing, providing intelligence, providing a public order rapid deployment unit that could react to unforeseen events with special weapons and tactics, with explosive ordnance disposal, those kinds of issues. But we had to deal with things that you would not normally find in a normal police service, such as holy site protection. Again, as Art discussed, with full regard to those who are responsible for the holy sites. We talked about two concentric circles, the inner circle being those religious factions who were responsible for them, and the outer circle being the police service who would be able to intervene when it was necessary. And the same thing for entry and exit control. Made clear to us by both sides that somebody who was not a resident of the old city itself, and by the way, who is, and who can prove that they are, and this is something that had to be addressed in the government's issue, they were adamant that those who entered the old city from the Israeli side would exit from the Israeli side, or from the Palestinian side would exit from the Palestinian side. And therefore we would need a special form of police service at the entry and exit points to deal with such issues. And similarly, it was made plain to us that the police service would only have authority within the walls. We made the point that if we're going to get traffic moving properly and going through security issues, we might have to have some people outside the walls with authority. In case of pursuit, we might have to have members of the city police service going into either of the two nations. These were never resolved. They didn't say no, but they didn't say yes. And I think we had the impression when we finished that while they didn't agree with everything that was in it, they agreed with a number of things, and those that weren't specifically laid out could be dealt with if and when the situation gets into operation. The one very difficult issue for us was one that the Israelis were always able to handle, and that is the ability to flood the city in times of a major crisis for an extended period of time with security forces. The Israeli Defense Force is nearby and available for that. We didn't have that luxury, and hopefully such a circumstance would never exist, but we had to plan for it. And on that basis, we suggested a reaction force from outside of Israel and Palestine, and outside of the police service itself, might prove such a solution should agreement be given to certain nations to provide such an organization, and should both sides agree to it.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Leon Weintraub, University of Wisconsin, Washington Center, Student International Affairs.
seem to have heard a consensus on a special regime that would have robust authority, but yet only in certain limited areas. In the course of discussion, the thought occurred to me that while it's not exactly a parallel situation, might there be lessons learned from the existence of the multilateral force and observers currently on the border between Israel and Egypt? It's because you are speaking about not having an international body, but recognizing sovereignty from each side. Again, it's not an exact parallel situation, but we do have several decades of existence with Israelis, Egyptians, and others working to see that this is a successful operation. I'm wondering if there are some lessons learned from this, if you looked at that.
I might ask Art Hughes, the Director General of the Multinational Force and Observers, to impart his lessons learned.
Thank you very much. My name is John Cattell.
Excuse me, we're just calling for a comment here.
I did not plant that question, but as was mentioned in my introduction, I was the Director General of the MFO for 6 years, and in working with John and Roy on the security paper, and then working with the others on the governance, and then with David Cameron on the mandate elements, a lot of my thinking and a lot of what I suggested was informed by those 6 years of working very intensely and almost on a day-to-day basis in some cases with the Israeli and Egyptian authorities, as well as the force and observers in the Sinai, and also Operation, of course, in part of Israel. I think the thing that I thought was the most important was that the chief administrator be fully empowered, and of course be responsible to what we decided to call the governance board, and you'll see it detailed in the documentation. But that a chief administrator who truly had authority was given a mandate that was clear, that was broad, that that chief administrator then could use as his source of power. A lot of power in very specific, limited areas, but a lot of power in those areas. I think that was the main lesson learned. But there are many other things just on operation. For example, the liaison system. One of the most important elements in the MFO is the liaison system. It's a structured system. The protocol to the Egyptian-Israeli treaty that created the MFO, part of which was drafted by Dan Kurtzer, provides specifically for a liaison system, and that the various parties have to appoint designated people to participate in this liaison system. And so there are many elements in the security paper of the liaison system, and of Israeli and Palestinian liaison officers actually assigned in the operations center of the Old City Police Service, which would be located in the Old City. Those are a couple of very specific examples, but there are others as well. But it's not a template. But there were lessons that I thought were applicable.